I never thought of myself as a survivalist. I wasn't the type to disappear into the backcountry for weeks with nothing but a knife and a flint, but I did enjoy hiking, and I knew my way around a map and compass well enough to keep myself out of trouble. Most of the time, I stuck to the trails, but that day was different. My dad had passed away not long before, and I was carrying around a lot of weight in my chest, more than I could stand. He was the one who first got me outside, the one who dragged me on weekend trips when I would have rather been there watching TV at home. Now that he was gone, I felt like the woods were the only place I could go to try and sort myself out. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts, no noise but the sound of the wind through the trees. The place I chose was a stretch of forested canyon. I'd hiked near it a few times, but never gone that deep into it. I remember standing at the edge of the canyon early in the hike, looking out at the drop. The walls were jagged and shadowed, lined with moss and brush. It wasn't the kind of place that you wanted to fall into, but it had this strange beauty to it, and I could feel my dad out there. The air felt cooler coming up from the depths, carrying that damp, earthy smell that you only get deep in the woods. I tightened the straps on my pack, breathed in that fresh pine-scented air, and told myself this is exactly what I needed. Peace, quiet, and space to breathe. At that point, it was just an ordinary hike. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary waiting for me. At least, that's what I believed. I decided to go off trail that day to really get out there by myself. So I moved slowly, partly because I didn't want to twist an ankle, and partly because I was in no hurry. The silence, though, was the first thing I noticed. Not that complete silence that you get in a sealed room, but that kind of muffled stillness the woods sometimes have after rain. My mind drifted as I walked. I thought about Dad, about the weekends he'd wake up early to beat the heat, about the peanut butter sandwiches he'd always brought. We'd sit there and eat it on fallen logs. Back then I hadn't really appreciated it. Now, I would have given anything to hear his voice telling me to keep up. Every so often, something would break the quiet. A bird call high in the trees, even once a flash of deer bounding away through the undergrowth. For the most part, though, I felt like I had the whole place to myself. It was comforting at first. I wanted space. I wanted to feel small compared to the woods around me. But then I realized that it was getting too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I caught myself stopping to listen more than once, looking around as if I expected something or someone to be there. It was strange. Nothing had happened yet, but unease had already started creeping in. I came back around to the edge of the canyon without realizing it. I didn't know I drifted so close. The ridge narrowed there, just wide enough for a person to stand if they didn't mind a steep drop on their side. I kept to the safer ground a few feet back, but I couldn't help glancing over the edge now and then. The walls dropped straight down in places, 30, maybe 40 feet. At the bottom was a jumble of rocks and brush. That's when I saw it. At first, it was nothing more than movement, something shifting against the darker shadows down near the canyon floor. My first thought was a bear. This was bear country after all, and I'd been told more than once to be careful when hiking alone off trail. My heart jumped into my throat, but I held still, squinting down into the ravine. The shape moved again, and I caught a better look. The terrain was jagged and broken, with slabs of stone jutting at these odd angles. Whatever it was, moved with purpose, climbing up towards the ridge, and it didn't have a problem moving over those rocks. I crouched low without even thinking about it, the way you do when you don't want to be seen. My pulse was already starting to pound. If it was a bear, I wasn't sure what the smart move was. Stand tall, back away, make noise? My mind raced through half-remembered bits of advice, but the longer I watched, the less I was convinced that this was a bear at all. Something was off. Bears, even the biggest ones, have a certain shape to them. Rounded haunches, short legs that moved in a particular gait. This thing didn't move like that. It climbed with a steady strength, hauling itself up over rocks in a way that looked almost human. It wasn't on all fours either. More than once I saw it rear up, pushing itself along with legs that were far too long for a bear. I stayed frozen where I was, pressed low, eyes fixed on that ridge. Whatever it was getting closer, and the more I saw, the more certain I became this was no ordinary animal. I held my breath as the shape climbed higher, pulling itself up off the break in the wall of the rocks. For a moment, I only saw a massive, dark hand, leathery skin, long fingers splayed against the stone. Then the rest of this thing heaved up out of the gap, and I got the clearest look yet. It dragged itself up until it stood fully on the ridge opposite me. I swear the air went out of my lungs. It was enormous. Not just big, gigantic. I'd guess 9, maybe 10 feet tall if I had to put a number on it, and built like a wall of muscle under its thick coat of hair. The hair was red-brown, darker in some places, wet and hanging in matted clumps. What threw me most was the shape, though. The proportions weren't right for any animal I knew. The head looked too small for its body, almost sunken between those huge sloping shoulders. There wasn't really a neck either, just this unbroken line from the skull down into the bulk of its torso. The arms hung long, past where a person's knees would be, thick and powerful. It shifted its weight from one foot to the other like it was settling in, and the ground beneath it actually trembled. 800 pounds, maybe more. That's the number that popped into my head. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. Like walking into a barn that hadn't been cleaned in months mixed with something rank and sour. This heavy musk of wet animal layered with urine and sweat. I gagged, clamping a hand over my mouth, and my stomach lurched like I was actually going to throw up. I couldn't look away from this thing. I studied its massive chest, rising and falling as it breathed, the way the damp hair stuck to its skin. My brain scrambled for explanations, anything that would fit into the world that I understood. But I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was a Sasquatch. I remember thinking, this can't be real. That's not a bear. And yet, there it was, not 20 yards away from me. The creature pulled itself the rest of the way out of the rocks and stood there on the ridge. Just a few seconds, it stood still. It didn't move at all. Just stood facing the canyon, chest rising and falling, huge arms hanging at its sides. Then it tilted forward slightly and stared into the abyss below like it was studying something that I couldn't see. And I wasn't about to go stand by it and take a look down either. I stayed frozen. My knees were actually starting to ache from being crouched down, but I didn't dare shift my weight. Every time I exhaled, I did it slow, through my nose, the way you might if you were hiding from someone in the next room. Any little sound could set this thing off, and I wasn't about to let it know that I was there. Later, when I timed it in my head, I figured this entire thing happened for about 5 minutes, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But it was long enough for my legs to start trembling from holding still, long enough for my jaw to ache from clenching it so tight. And during that time, it's like it didn't even know I was there. That was almost harder to process than the sight of this thing. Here I was, close enough to see water dripping from its hair, close enough to smell it, and it was like this thing was completely unaware of me. The mix of emotions was impossible to untangle. I knew, without a doubt, I was seeing something people spend their entire lives wondering about. It shifted after a while, dropping its weight back and lowering itself onto the ground in one slow motion. Sitting there with its legs bent awkwardly to one side, it reminded me of a gorilla in the zoo. Its shoulders rolled as it settled, and once it reached up with a long arm to scratch under its ribs. The movement was casual and almost human, and somehow that made the whole thing even stranger. From where I was crouched, I could see the muscles in its back ripple as it hunched forward. It was resting its elbows on its knees. Every so often it twitched its head, the way a person might if a bug flew near their ear. I remember thinking over and over, this is real. This is really happening. This isn't a story in a book or something on TV. It's right here in front of me. But then, I don't know what made it happen. Maybe a shift in the wind carried my scent, or maybe I moved a fraction without realizing it and it heard me. Whatever it was, though, after sitting there for what felt like forever, the creature suddenly shifted. It didn't turn its head like an animal sniffing the air. It rotated its whole upper body the way a man might if his shoulders were angled halfway around. And then its eyes found me. I thought I was doomed. Those eyes froze me in place. They weren't glowing, not red or yellow like you'd hear in old campfire stories. They were dark, almost black, but very much alive. There was this intelligence to them that you see in primates, something that pinned me harder than any weight could. For a second, I thought this thing might stand up and come straight at me, but its face was expressionless in a human sense. There was a heaviness in its stare, though, like it was measuring me, deciding what I was, or if it should attack or flee. Its brow was low and heavy, and the rest of its features seemed almost swallowed by the bulk of its head. It had a wide mouth, lips pressed shut, jawline square and powerful. This was a predator and prey moment, and I was on the wrong end. I remember thinking, if it comes for me, that's it. There's nothing I can do. Then, just as suddenly as it turned to stare at me, it shifted again. With a single motion, it rose to its full height. I thought I had braced myself for that, but seeing that thing stand sent another jolt through me. My breath caught in my chest. 10 feet, maybe more. Its head nearly brushed the branches overhead. It didn't hesitate. One moment it was on the ridge, and the next it plunged back over the embankment, like the drop meant nothing. The motion was smooth, too, like it was practiced, almost casual, like it was something that it did all the time. I stayed frozen, staring at the spot where this thing had just disappeared, waiting for another glimpse of it, but nothing came. The smell still lingered, don't get me wrong. Thick, sour, and pungent. It clung to the air, heavy enough to make my eyes water. Musk and sweat and something like ammonia. The sharp edge of urine. But no matter how many times I blinked, the sight of it rising to those massive feet, then dropping into the canyon like it was nothing, burned itself into me. I knew I would never forget it. Now I don't remember how long I stood there gripping that tree. It might have been 5 minutes, it might have been 30. My legs finally started working again though, and I forced myself to move. The forest trail felt like 1,000 miles away. I walked in a daze, head buzzing, replaying what I'd just seen over and over like a movie looped on a broken reel. When I finally reached the marked trail, relief should have come, but it didn't. My boots hit familiar dirt, and I still felt like something was behind me. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see it towering over the ridge. And then sitting behind the wheel, I just stared out through the windshield. Lucky. That's what some people would call it. I saw what others only talk about. I had proof that it's real. But I didn't feel lucky. I felt cursed. Cursed to carry that image forever. Cursed to know the truth and never shake it loose. 2 years later, I finally told someone. It was a hunting buddy of mine. A guy that I trusted. But I wasn't the first one to bring it up. He had asked me if I'd ever been near that canyon, and the way he mentioned it made my stomach knot up. I asked him why, and he hesitated before saying, "You're gonna think I'm nuts." That's when I knew what he saw. He told me he'd been out there one morning, moving quiet through the trees, when something massive cut across his line of sight near the canyon edge. He said it was only there for a few seconds, just long enough to register how tall and broad it was, before it turned on a dime and bolted into the timber. He swore it wasn't a bear, wasn't a man. Whatever it was, it wanted nothing to do with him. When he finished, I just sat there, heart pounding like I was back on that ridge again. Then I told him my story. I laid it all out. He listened without laughing or cutting me off, just nodding like he'd known the whole time. For the first time since that day, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't alone. Someone else had seen it, right there in the same place, and it was somebody that I trusted already. His encounter had been brief, mine was drawn out, but it was the same creature. We both knew it. He described the same coloration of the fur, the same smell, the same build. I believe it was the exact same one. But that relief, someone else seeing it, it didn't erase the memory. It just gave me something that I hadn't had in 2 years. Validation. I can't ever forget what I saw that day. I've told the story enough times now that the words come easy, but the memory behind them never softens. Every detail is burned in. The way it climbed, the size of its shoulders, the way its eyes locked on me, the way it stank. The woods haven't felt the same to me since. I still hike sometimes, but not with the same carefree attitude I had before. There's respect now, and caution, and I know if I ever see it again, that I don't think it'll be a violent interaction. I don't think these creatures are necessarily mean. I think they want to just be left alone. People do ask me if I want to see it again, and the truth is, no, I don't. I feel lucky to have seen it, and I feel cursed to have to carry it. I went into those woods that day looking for peace, and I found something else entirely. But part of me just can't help but think that maybe I had that encounter because I'd just lost my dad, and that thing felt it and wanted me to have something else to think about. What do you think? Can those creatures do that? Or was I just at the wrong place at the wrong time? I was 11 years old the summer everything changed. Old enough to roam barefoot from morning till night, young enough that I still believed the woods were ours to play in without any kind of consequence. My grandparents used to own this cabin tucked into the pines, way out in the Pacific Northwest. I couldn't point it out on a map to you today if I tried. Back then, I didn't pay attention to the highways or counties. All I knew was it took a long drive down a dirt road to get there, and once you arrived, you felt like the rest of the world had disappeared. The cabin was our gathering place every summer. My family, my cousins, sometimes an uncle or two. It wasn't fancy. A wooden porch, a tin roof that sang when it rained, a single bathroom that you had to wait in line for. But to us kids, it was paradise. We'd spend our days swimming in the lake that glittered just beyond the trees or fishing off the dock with bent poles. We'd dig up the worms ourselves. We caught frogs, bugs, anything that moved slow enough to be scooped into a jar. After dark, we'd roast marshmallows until they were blackened and gooey, and someone always ended up with sticky fingers and a bellyache. Those were golden days, full of little adventures and secrets only kids thought were important, like who had the best skipping rock or which cousin was brave enough to sleep closest to the window. But if you've ever had a memory that turns sour with time, you'll know what I mean when I say the summer I'm thinking of doesn't sit the same as the others. It started out just like all the rest. Hot afternoons, mosquito bites, ice-cold lemonade. Only somewhere along the way, the air got heavier. The woods didn't feel quite so safe anymore. That was the summer that I learned monsters weren't just in storybooks. Getting there felt like traveling to another world. The dirt road wound through miles of thick forest, no houses in sight, no gas stations or corner stores. By the time we pulled up, the nearest sign of life was far behind us. It was just trees, lake, and sky. There were a lot of us packed into that little place. That year it was my brother and I, plus 3 cousins close to our age, our parents, our aunt and uncle, and our grandparents. The first few days, pure excitement, the kind of freedom that kids crave. Still, even then though, you couldn't ignore how alone we really were. It didn't take long for things to start feeling off that summer. The first night after the campfire died down and we'd all been herded inside, the quiet didn't seem to last. I woke up to the sounds of thuds out by the porch, heavy enough that the windows rattled in their frame. A moment later, the dogs went crazy. My grandparents kept 2 mutts, half shepherd, half who knows what. They weren't the type to fuss over every squirrel that crossed the yard, but that night, they barked like something was right up against the walls. The adults shuffled around, trying to calm everybody. My uncle peered out through the screen door, but came back with a shrug. Forest full of wild animals. Could be a raccoon, maybe a bear nosing around. Just go back to sleep. That was easier said than done. Every crack of a branch outside sounded louder than it should. I lay there listening, wide-eyed, until the silence finally crept back in. Morning made it feel silly, like maybe I dreamed half of it. But then we found the cooler. The lid was flipped off and lying a few feet away in the grass. Inside, what was left was nothing but melting ice and waterlogged wrappers. All the hot dogs were gone. So were most of the marshmallows. The grown-ups gathered around, studying the mess like it was a crime scene. My dad said raccoons could do it easy, but my mom wasn't so convinced. My uncle muttered about bears, though no tracks showed up in the dirt. We kids mostly stood back whispering, and then everybody realized that it wasn't such a good idea to keep the cooler outside in the first place. I couldn't shake the memory of how hard those thuds had rattled the windows the night before, though. Maybe raccoons got into the cooler, but raccoons didn't make the ground shake like that. And bears? I didn't want to picture a bear standing that close to the cabin. The noises didn't stop after the first night. If anything, they grew bolder. It was about 3 or 4 days later, for several evenings in a row now, something stirred in the woods. It wasn't the usual background chatter of the forest. These were sharp, loud sounds, knocks that echoed like someone taking a branch to a tree trunk, followed by the steady crack of limbs snapping under the heavy weight. One night, while we were supposed to be brushing our teeth and settling down, My cousin pressed his face to the window and swore he saw something move between the trees. He backed away pale, insisting it wasn't a deer. It wasn't shaped right. The rest of us rushed over, but by then there was nothing. Just shadows folding into each other. He caught plenty of teasing for it, but I noticed he didn't go near the window again. The strangest part were the smells. They would roll in some nights like a fog, seeping through the cracks in the old cabin walls. They were sharp and sour, somewhere between a skunk and wet dog left too long in the sun. It made you wrinkle your nose and gag if you breathed too deep. None of us kids had smelled anything like it before, and even the adults seemed unsettled. They had their own debates and hushed voices on the porch when they thought we couldn't hear. Bears were the popular theory, maybe a big one nosing around for scraps. But there were never tracks, no claw marks on the cooler, nothing solid to point to. My uncle pointed out that a bear should have gone after we yelled, after the dogs raised hell. Yet, whatever this was, kept coming back. It was me who saw it first. Not a shape or a shadow, but movement clear enough that it couldn't be explained away. I'd woken up late, the air heavy with that skunky stink. I went to the window almost on instinct, and there I caught it. This was tall, upright. It glided between the trees like it knew exactly where it was going. The moment it was gone, I scrambled to wake my dad, stammering out of what I'd seen. He gave me the same answer he'd given for years after. It was probably just a bear. You were half asleep. Don't let your imagination get the best of you. But I knew better. Bears didn't walk like that, and whatever I saw had shoulders as broad as a man's, only taller, heavier, and more muscular. That was the night I stopped feeling safe at the cabin window. But then something worse happened, a few nights later. It happened on a night when sleep couldn't come, no matter how I tossed and turned. The cabin was thick with heat. My cousins were sprawled in their sleeping bags, breathing deep, and the sounds of the dogs had gone quiet. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, when the feeling crept in. You know the one, like someone's eyes are on you. It started as a twinge, then grew until the hairs on the back of my neck stood stiff. I didn't hear a sound, but I felt it, as sure as if someone was leaning right over me. Slowly, too afraid to move fast, I turned my head toward the window, and that's when I saw something looking in. It was pressed against the glass, the shape that made every muscle in my body lock tight. Huge dark eyes stared straight at me, a wide flat nose that fogged up the pane of glass. The face was covered in coarse hair, but not completely. Patches of bare skin showed through, rough and weathered. Its brow was heavy, its features broad, and though it was nothing like a man that I'd ever seen before, it wasn't exactly animal either. It was both, and neither at the same time. I froze. For a moment I couldn't tell if my heart had stopped or if it was just beating so hard I couldn't feel anything. That thing at the glass didn't move. It just stared, unblinking like it was studying me. Finally I found my voice and started to yell for everybody. When everyone started to stir, they looked out the window, and nothing was there. I stayed up long after that, my eyes locked on that window, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Not that night. The next morning, I told my dad about everything that I had seen. I poured it out in a rush, how it had been right there staring at me. My mom shook her head gently, said I was dreaming. My dad's answer was sharper. Quit spooking your cousins. Even my uncle, who was usually the first to back us kids up, just rubbed his chin and said, "Probably a nightmare, that's all." But I know what I saw. Those eyes weren't the eyes of a dream. They were alive. They were thinking. There was intelligence to them, and that's what's haunted me most all of these years. Not the size or the hair or the face looking in the window, but it was the way that those eyes looked at me. Every book or article I've read since claims Sasquatch, if that's what it truly was, want nothing to do with people. They want nothing more than to stay hidden and be left alone in the woods. They avoid people, slip away before they're noticed. So why was it pressed against the window that night, staring at a scared kid? That question has followed me my whole life, and still I don't have an answer. After that night, it wasn't just me anymore. The grown-ups started talking about it. Not loud, but you could see it in the way that they carried themselves. My dad started keeping the lanterns burning later than usual. My mom told us kids not to wander down to the dock without an adult. Even my grandparents, who'd never seemed rattled by anything, sat a little straighter on their porch. Their eyes would scan the tree line more often than before. The kids felt it too. The games of hide and seek stopped. No more daring each other to creep into the woods at dusk. We stuck close to the cabin, inventing indoor games, restless and quiet in ways kids shouldn't be at that age. The laughter faded. We were still together, but it didn't feel like vacation anymore. And then the breaking point came on what would be our last night. We'd gone to bed early, the grown-ups thinking a good night's sleep might settle everyone down. Instead, the noises came back worse than ever. It started with this heavy crashing, like the trees themselves were being pushed aside. Then came the crack of sticks snapping under weight of something that was too big to be a deer. Whatever was circling the cabin was moving slow, never rushing, never wandering off. The dogs barked until they were hoarse, then whined and went silent. We huddled together inside. My uncle sat near the door with his rifle across his knees, but his finger never touched the trigger. I think he knew, same as the rest of us, that firing would only make things worse. By morning, no one argued. My grandparents cut the trip short, which was something I'd never seen them do before. We packed up quick and quiet, leaving behind half of the food and some of the gear just to get on the road faster. No one said the word Bigfoot. No one really said anything at all. It was like we were running from something we weren't allowed to name. Looking back now, it's funny how that summer has become a marker in our family history. We still talk about it, though these days the stories get told around kitchen tables instead of campfires. My cousins will roll their eyes and exaggerate details, and my brother always jokes about the summer Sasquatch ruined our vacation. But underneath the laughter, we all know it was real. That summer was supposed to be just another stretch of swimming in marshmallows, and it turned into a summer we packed up early and never stayed at the cabin the same way again. My grandfather was the one who stayed quiet the longest. He'd listen when the story came up, but he never added to it. For years, I wondered if he thought we were all making it up. But then, when I was grown, I asked him straight out. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I saw it. I just didn't want to scare you kids worse than you already were. It wasn't going to hurt us, but everybody got spooked, and that's when I decided it was time to get out of there." That was all. No speeches, no long description. Just the plain truth from a man who didn't bother with lies. Even with his words, I'm left with questions, though. What still keeps me up some nights isn't what it was. I think we all know the answer to that. But why it acted the way it did. Like I said, every book, every article that I've read says they avoid people, slip away before anyone can get close. So, why didn't it? Why press its face against the window and stare me down? Why circle the cabin like it was testing our nerves instead of disappearing into the timber where it came from? It never attacked. It never tried to break in. It just lingered, bold and unafraid, like it wanted to be seen. That's the part that I can't shake. When I close my eyes and remember that summer, I don't see the lake or the campfire or the bugs we caught. I see those dark, intelligent eyes at the window, filled with something else that I can't name. Maybe curiosity? Maybe even anger? Or a warning? Whatever it was, it changed the way that I look at the world. Monsters weren't just in storybooks anymore, and they weren't nearly as hidden as people like to believe. I don't tell this story often, but when I do, I usually start by saying it happened in the Pacific Northwest, somewhere in the foothills outside of Spokane, Washington. It was years ago now, long enough that I've had plenty of time to think it through and try to reason it away, but the memory hasn't faded one bit. My dad and I were out deer hunting that day. It was our thing in the fall. We'd go out together, just the two of us, and spend the day in the woods. I wasn't a great shot back then, but Dad liked teaching me, and I liked tagging along. That afternoon, the weather couldn't have been better. The air had that cool, crisp bite that only comes once the heat of the summer's gone, and the cold of winter hasn't fully taken over yet. The forest was beautiful. Golden leaves clung to maples and aspens, and every step we took sent more crunching underfoot. Visibility was wide open. There was no haze, no fog, just dry earth, scattered pine needles, and shafts of light breaking through the canopy. We weren't in any rush. That's how Dad liked to hunt. Slow, steady, and quiet. We walked side by side for a while, not saying much. The only sounds were the wind brushing through the branches and the occasional chatter of a jaybird somewhere out ahead. Nothing about that start of the day suggested anything unusual was coming. Looking back, that's one of the parts that sticks with me most. How normal everything was before everything went to hell. The old logging road we were on eventually started to close in. At some point years back, it must have been wide enough for trucks to haul timber, but by the time that we were on it, it was more like a suggestion of a road than anything else. There were young firs that were sprouting up in the middle, and blackberry vines clawed at our pants as we pushed through. Dad said deers like these old cuts because the new growth gave them plenty of food to feed on. So we stuck with it for a while, moving slow and scanning for tracks. After half a mile or so, the road petered out into the brush, and Dad pointed towards the break in the trees. "Let's try through there," he said. I followed him without much thought. He always had a sense for where the animals might be. The ground shifted from flat, rutted root bed to an uneven forest floor, tangled with roots and soft with needles. There wasn't a real trail to follow, just a mess of faint runs made by a deer and elk cutting through the understory. We wove our way along anyway, stepping where the ground looked most worn. It wasn't easy walking. Branches snatched at our jackets, and the ground sloped enough to keep us paying attention to our footing. That's when the feeling started to creep over me. I wouldn't call it fear, not yet, but it was like the woods had shifted from welcoming to watchful. I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Dad didn't seem to notice. He was still focused, eyes scanning the ground for fresh sign, pausing every so often to check ahead with that hunter's patience that he had. I kept close, letting him lead, but I couldn't shake the thought that the silence meant something. I've hunted enough since then to know that sometimes the woods just go still, but that day, it just felt different. The deer runs eventually funneled us down into this low ravine. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a shallow cut in the land where water must have flown heavier in the spring. But the moment we stepped down into it, I noticed how different everything sounded. Our footsteps seemed louder, carrying further than they should have. I slowed down without even realizing it, glancing back over my shoulder more than once. That same uneasy feeling I'd had under the canopy was sharper now. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept thinking, we're not alone here. The smell hit me next. I know it sounds cliche, but it came with this gross foulness, like body odor mixed with wet dog before we even saw this thing. Maybe it's one of the telltale signs. It was faint, but just strong enough to make me cringe. Dad didn't say anything, but I noticed him pause for a second, nostrils flaring like he caught it too. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched at that point. It wasn't just nerves now. It was a weight pressing in, a sense that eyes were on us from somewhere beyond the trees. I found myself looking toward the darker thickets at the edges of the ravine, half expecting to see movement, but nothing stirred. We hadn't been out in the ravine long when I caught it. At first, I thought it was just an echo of our own footsteps bouncing off of the cut, but then I realized the timing was wrong. Something else was moving, close, but not on the same path. It was heavy. Each step came with a solid thud, followed by the crunch of forest debris giving way. We could hear dry sticks, brittle leaves, pine cones. Whatever it was, this thing didn't care about noise. It wasn't trying to sneak. I stopped walking, and Dad froze beside me. We both turned our heads just slightly toward the slope above us. The sound wasn't coming from behind, where we'd come from. It was off to our right, moving parallel, hidden in the thicker trees. A limb about 7 or 8 feet off the ground swayed slightly, like something broad had brushed past it. Dad leaned in close and whispered, "Elk. Maybe a moose." His voice was calm, but I could tell he wasn't convinced either. I didn't answer. My stomach was in knots, and I couldn't shake the certainty that we were hearing something that was not on 4 legs. The rhythm was too careful. Heel then toe, heel then toe. Heavy, steady, and balanced in a way I recognized without wanting to. It was walking. Like us. Whatever it was, it matched our movements almost perfectly, like it knew where we were going. My mouth was dry and I swallowed hard, trying to stay quiet. Dad had his rifle angled across his knees, but he didn't raise it. He just stared into the tree line, waiting for something to show itself. We were no longer hunters in those woods. We were being hunted. Or at least, that's how it felt. And then it all stopped. The footsteps that had been pacing us went quiet all at once, like something had thrown a switch. The silence that followed was worse than the noise had been. I strained my ears trying to pick up the slightest sound, and that's when I caught it. Slow, heavy breathing. The breathing continued, steady and unsettling. Every few seconds, it would shift slightly, and when it did, the sound of its body brushing the trees made my stomach drop. Then for just a second, I caught the briefest glimpse through a gap in the brush. Dark movement. A shape sliding between trunks. Broad, tall, upright. But it was gone before my brain could even lock the pieces together. I glanced at my dad. His face was pale. He'd seen it too, and his eyes were locked on the tree line. He gave me a quick shake of the head, the kind of signal that meant, don't move, don't breathe, just wait. Whatever was out there, it was very big, and I could feel it in a way with the breathing. It was like it was pausing, watching us, and then taking another breath, like we were caught in some invisible standoff. The worst part wasn't what I could hear, it was what I couldn't see. This thing was so close I could picture it leaning just beyond the trees, deciding what to do to us. Then the brush across the ravine shifted. At first it was just movement, then something dark slid between the trunks and stepped out into the open, right at the edge of the creek about 40 yards away. I'll never forget the first clear look. It was a Sasquatch. That was obvious instantly. Bears don't walk like that, and they sure don't look like that. The thing was upright, towering over the brush around it, broad shoulders stretched wider than any man's, with arms that hung down so far they looked too long for its body. The whole frame was covered in dark, coarse fur. It wasn't matted or ragged like you'd expect from some kind of wild animal. It was laying flat in places. And those muscles, every line of them was visible. This wasn't some lumbering fat creature. It looked built. Even standing still, you could tell it was fast, like every inch of it was designed for sudden movement. Then I saw the face. It wasn't all ape like you'd imagine from cartoons or books. The face had structure. Cheekbones, a nose, a brow. The eyes were set deep, and when they caught the light, you could see them clearly. They weren't animal eyes. They looked too much like ours. The expression on that face didn't match the body. It wasn't snarling or angry. It looked startled. Its mouth hung open slightly, the corners turned down as if it had come around a bend and wasn't expecting to find us there. For a second, I swear it looked more shocked than we were. It didn't come closer, it just stood there, eyes locked on us. I could feel the strength in it, but it didn't feel aggressive. It was like we'd stumbled onto its path, and both sides were trying to figure out what to do about it. For all its size and power, that was the part that stuck with me the most. The look in its eyes. Startled, weary, maybe even curious. Not a monster ready to tear us apart. And then one massive foot slid back like it didn't want to startle us any more than we already were. It didn't even turn right away. It kept its chest towards us, shoulders square, eyes locked on ours the whole time. Step by step, it moved backwards across the creek bed, every motion fluid and controlled. I remember thinking how strange it was. Something that size should have been clumsy or noisy, but this thing was graceful. There was no anger there, no threat, just a steady watchfulness, like it was making sure we weren't about to do something stupid. Dad hadn't raised his rifle, and I think that made the difference. It knew that we weren't a danger, and it seemed content to leave it at that. It finally turned. The motion was smooth and natural, and then it was slipping between the trees. Dad didn't say a word. He just gave me a look and another small nod that meant one thing. It was time to go. We didn't run, but we did move fast. My eyes kept darting to the sides of the ravine, watching for it again. Dad kept his rifle angled low but ready, his eyes scanning the trees without ever breaking stride. I stayed close, matching his pace, fighting the urge to keep glancing back over my shoulder. The climb out of the ravine seemed to take forever, but eventually we broke through and the logging road appeared ahead. Once we reached the truck, it was like the tension broke all at once. We talked all the way home. It was all about it. We went over every detail. We kept circling back to the same point. We had seen a Sasquatch. And you know what? It felt pretty amazing. Years later, the memory is still sharp. Sometimes I wonder what it wanted that day. Was it curious? Was it checking its territory? Or did we just happen to cross paths with something that preferred to stay hidden? I don't know. But what I do know is it was an incredible encounter. You hear all these other ones that end in terror or fear or this resentment for the forest, but what we saw that day was magical. What I do know is it wasn't an ordinary animal. It's like it's something in between, something that doesn't fit into the world the way we think it does. But I can tell you this. As far as I'm concerned, it belongs here just as much as we do. My name's not important for this, and honestly, I'd rather leave it out. Folks tend to look at you sideways when you start talking about things like this, and I've had enough years of second-guessing myself to know better than to toss my name onto the story. What I can say is this. It happened when I was 14, up in the foothills of the Cascade Range in Washington. My parents had decided we'd take a summer weekend away from town and do some camping. It wasn't anything fancy. We weren't the kind of family that spent thousands on campers or RVs. We had an old Suburban, a couple of big canvas tents, and the usual coolers full of hot dogs, sodas, and marshmallows. My mom's younger cousin Danny came with us too. He was in his early 20s then, and we all thought he was the coolest guy alive because he cracked jokes nonstop and had this easy way of making things fun. The spot we chose wasn't far off a dirt service road, maybe 3 or 4 miles up from a small logging town whose name I don't even remember anymore. It felt remote enough to be an adventure, but we weren't stranded in the middle of nowhere. That first evening was nothing but ordinary. Dad set up the fire pit, Mom laid out the food, Danny taught us how to skip rocks on the creek nearby. We laughed, we ate, we teased each other. Just a regular family camping trip. We had 2 big tents, one for my parents, who was with my younger sister, and another for me, my brother, and cousin Danny. The Suburban sat a few yards off, back towards the trees like a makeshift wall. Dinner was nothing special, but somehow it tasted better out there. Hot dogs roasted on sticks, potato chips, baked beans, and soda. Danny pretended to burn his hot dog on purpose and waved it around like a torch. My sister giggled so hard she spilled her soda. That was just how he was, always stirring up laughter without even trying. And that's just how the night began. Normal. When everything started to take a turn, it was late enough that the fire had burned down to a steady bed of coals, glowing red and sending up the occasional flicker. Mom had already bundled up my little sister into her sleeping bag, but the rest of us lingered outside, enjoying the night. Danny was telling one of his ridiculous stories, something about getting lost in a grocery store when he was little, and Dad was poking at the fire with a stick like he always did, stirring the embers like it was some kind of science experiment. And then we started hearing it. A loud snap coming from upslope, maybe 30 or 40 yards above the camp. It wasn't the crackle of a twig underfoot, but something bigger, like a branch giving way under real weight. We all went quiet for a second, heads turning towards the sound. The slope was shadowed, nothing but a dark wall of trees against the sky. "Deer," Dad said after a moment, voice casual. "Big fella, moving through, that's all." But a minute later, it happened again. Another snap, followed by the sound of something heavy shifting through the brush. Not running, not in a hurry, just moving. I remember hugging my knees and staring into the fire, trying to convince myself that whatever was out there was just a big animal, nothing more. The woods were full of them. We were the intruders, not the other way around. Still, though, I caught Dad glancing towards the slope more than once. Every time a stick cracked or leaves rustled, his hand twitched towards the flashlight by his chair. He never used it, though. I guess he didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing and spook me and my brother. Eventually, the noises faded, or maybe we just got used to them. We let the fire die down and crawled into our tents. Everyone acted like it was nothing, just another part of the wilderness. But lying there, listening to the creek trickle by and the trees shifting in the breeze, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us from that dark ridge. Call it my imagination, but what I'm about to tell you afterwards really solidified the fact for me that there was truly something up there, even before everything happened. Because sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound that froze me in place. At first, I thought it was just part of a dream, the way noises can slip into your head while you're half asleep, but then it came again, and I realized everyone else had stirred too. What we heard was a scream. Not the kind of high-pitched shriek you'd expect from a bobcat or a coyote. This was deeper, louder, carrying a weight to it that made the tent walls vibrate just a little. It started low, like a rumbly growl. Then it rose into something so sharp it made my chest ache. I'd never heard anything like it before. Dad unzipped the tent flap that he was in, just a few inches, and poked his head out. He didn't step outside. Then it came again, this time from further to the right, echoing down the slope. It was long, drawn out like something calling into the night for an answer. "What is that?" my brother whispered. "Cougar," Dad muttered from the other tent, though it didn't sound like he believed it. "They can scream like a woman sometimes." But Danny shook his head. "No, man, I've heard cougars. That's not a cougar." The scream cut through the night again for a third time. It was followed by a heavy crack like another big branch snapping under weight. The sound made the hair on my arms stand up. My sister started crying softly in the other tent, and I could hear Mom hushing her. Another call echoed, and then another, overlapping like two voices. They bounced off the trees and seemed to come from everywhere at once. My brother clutched my arm so hard his nails dug into my skin. I wanted to pull away, but I was too scared to even move. The fire outside had burned down to little more than orange coals now, throwing no light past the ring of stones, so everything beyond that was pitch black, and in that blackness, the sounds just seemed enormous. Danny finally reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam swept across camp, lighting up the Suburban, the coolers, the empty chairs, but it didn't reach far enough to show what was out there. Then he swung it up slope. The light just dissolved into the wall of trees. "You see," he said, forcing a laugh. "Nothing there." Obviously, he was just trying to comfort us at this point. None of us believed him, though. The screams went on, each one rattling through the forest, each one sounding closer. And underneath it all, there was this steady rhythm of movement. Brush shifting, branches popping, something big and heavy circling above us. We sat there in silence, every sense stretched tight, waiting for whatever it was to show itself. And though it never did, the not seeing was somehow making it worse. We all crowded into one tent and stayed huddled, every one of us wide awake. The screaming had stopped, but the silence it left behind wasn't any better. It was like we were just waiting for something else to happen. And then this smell came in on the breeze. It just drifted in at first, then stronger, like something carried through the wind, almost like wet animal fur mixed with rotting plants. It wasn't a skunk. It was something I'd never smelled before. It made my stomach turn. Then came a sound that made every nerve in my body jump. A sharp, hollow knock, like wood striking wood. It echoed once, then again a few seconds later, from a different spot upslope. It wasn't random. It was like someone or something was sending a signal. "What the hell is that?" Danny muttered. For a while, there was nothing but that eerie smell hanging in the air. Then the quiet shattered with a sudden crash of breaking branches. It was so loud and so close it made my heart slam against my ribs. I leapt up and almost fell through the tent because I had moved so quickly. The noises would stop for long stretches, just long enough for us to start hoping that whatever it was had moved on. But then, like clockwork, another heavy step or the crack of something would break, and it would be in a different direction. First to the left, then to the right, then further back. It was like this thing was circling us, keeping its distance but letting us know that it was there. My dad's face was tight. His eyes were darting towards the slope. "We're packing up," he said. His voice was low, but the edge in it cut through the fog of sleep. "Now." Nobody argued. We'd all had enough. My sister's face was pale and streaked with dried tears. My brother didn't even argue when Dad told him to get his shoes on. The campsite turned into chaos. Danny yanked stakes from the ground while Mom stuffed sleeping bags half folded into their sacks. I tripped over the cooler trying to drag my duffel to the truck. My dad snapped at me to just leave the lantern. "We'll get it another time." His tone was sharper than usual, but nobody took it personally. We all felt the same. Just get out. The stress made us snap at each other anyway. Mom scolded Danny for throwing things into the Suburban too hard. Danny shot back that she was wasting time trying to fold blankets. We were almost done when it happened again. That scream. Louder than before. Closer, tearing through the night with a power that shook me to my bones. It came from upslope, no more than a stone's throw away. My sister shrieked. Mom cursed under her breath, and Dad's voice cut through the panic. "In the truck now." Then we were moving. The campsite was quickly shrinking behind us. We left the chairs, a lantern, even one of the tents half collapsed. All things we would normally never abandon. But that night, none of it mattered. All that mattered was getting away from whatever was out there, screaming at us in the dark. The drive out of those hills was the quietest I've ever heard my family. Normally, even on late night trips, Danny would crack a joke, or my brother would whine about being hungry, or my mom would ask my dad if he was sure he was going the right way. But that night, nobody said a word. We just sat stiff in our seats, eyes darting to the windows. By the time we pulled into the driveway, it was near dawn. We unloaded nothing. We just left the gear in the truck and stumbled into the house. Mom flicked on every light. My sister crawled into her bed fully dressed. My brother stretched out on the living room couch, too afraid to go into his room alone. In the days that followed, the story changed depending on who told it. Dad stuck to his line, maybe a cougar, maybe two. Danny kept shaking his head, saying none of that fit, that what we heard had lungs like nothing alive today. My brother swore up and down he'd seen glowing eyes on the slope. Nobody admitted to seeing that. We never did go back for the things we left. Dad said it wasn't worth the trip, and none of us argued. A lantern, a tent, a couple of folding chairs? Better to let them rot out there than risk it. Even now, years later, looking back on it, I can still hear the sound clear as day. I can still smell that funk, and no matter how many times I've tried to rationalize it, I can't make it fit a bear or a cougar or any other animal that I've read about. What we crossed paths with that night was not supposed to exist, but it does. I believe we brushed against something ancient, something that doesn't want to be found, but won't hesitate to remind you that it's out there. Sasquatch. I listen to the calls online. I've listened to ones that say that they're a Bigfoot, ones that say that they're a dogman. They sound different, and what we heard was definitely what people think a Sasquatch sounds like, which is why I'm sending this to you as a Sasquatch encounter. I know we didn't see it, but something was definitely out there. I've been camping plenty of times since that night, but never in those hills, and when someone warns me of an old legend, I show it respect. Not because I'm scared all the time, but because I've learned what's out there.